Welcome back to The Price of Business. I'm your host, Kevin Price, talking to you about you and your business. I've got John Bourke with me. And is that right, John? Did I pronounce that correctly?
That's correct, John Bourke. Good morning.
John Bourke, he's president of Allegiance Capital Corporation. You know, that hooked on phonics stuff really does work. Glad to have you on the program. We're going to talk a little bit about the state, really the identity crisis that I think mid-market companies have, and you work with mid-market companies. I kind of think that, there's always a lot of press about mega corporations. There's a certain amount of mystery around them and of course, a lot of ink given to them. And then there's a certain amount of romance around small business. It seems like this country has small businesses as one of its cornerstones. But that mid-market seems to get lost in the shuffle. And I'm doing a series of stories to kind of identify the importance and the role of the mid-market companies. And you've got a good pulse of that. Tell us a little bit about your company, Allegiance Capital Corporation, and how that gives you perspective.
Yeah, thanks, Kevin. Good morning. Allegiance Capital Corporation is a financial advisory firm, and we basically focus on lower middle market companies. That's companies that range in revenue anywhere from $20 to $500 million. That's an arguable range of numbers. And they bring bottom line profits anywhere from $4 to $50 million on up. And what we do is we brand ourselves a little bit differently than most investment banking firms in that we pride ourselves in being good marketers. We're good storytellers. We help the market understand the value of these middle market companies for the very reason that you mentioned. They are somewhat of a mystery because they're not publicly traded, so it's not easy to find information on them except for what they reveal. And so they are a little bit mysterious, but there is a great, rich, there's an abundance of legacy stories and things that we can talk about this morning. Yeah,
and unfortunately, we only have a few minutes in our total interview for this interview, although I envision doing more in the future. Where do you start? What's the important thing for the listener to know when it comes to mid-market companies?
Well, I think we specialize in privately held and closely held, and of course there are publicly traded middle market companies. But I think it's important for the listeners to recognize, and again, this is probably widely understood, that this is a very key part of the U.S. economy. These middle market companies, they're at the very centerpiece of job creation in our country. They're the fastest growing segment in terms of revenue in the United States. So including the publicly traded and privately traded, these are high-growth prospect companies whose stories are rich, and yet there's not much known about them, and there's a tremendous market for them. And yet the big challenge for them is getting their brand known. It's kind of like being a star on your local football team. You need to get recruited to the big leagues, and so your story has to be branded and known.
Yeah, really interesting. Allegiance Capital Corporation. That's Allegiance Capital Corporation.
That's right.
That's allcapcorp.com. And we have about a minute left. Final thoughts on this. What's your takeaway that you would have for the audience?
Well, I would say, we're really talking about an identity crisis, getting lost in the shuffle, and I that might be a bit of a misnomer. I would say there is no identity crisis except for those who perpetually suffer from an identity crisis, and those are people who don't have a good, clear business model, and they don't have a good, clear brand. So I guess, the advice to the middle market sector is make sure that you really have a defined marketplace reputation that leverages traditional marketing and digital media. Make sure that you have a very confident leadership succession plan because your kids may not want to take over that company. And make sure that you have a very well-planned exit strategy so that you know how long you want to stay with the company to transition it should you want to take on a partial owner or an investor. And then also, if you're a privately held business or a small business, quite often the founders are still deeply rooted. Mm-hmm. They still work for the company. And transitioning those founders' values so that they can be translated into the hands of a management team that can run it and perpetuate your legacy, those are important things to consider.
Thanks so much, John Bourke. John Bourke, he is with, again, All Capital Corporation, and that's allcapcorp.com. Thanks for your time.
Thanks, Kevin.
When we come back, much more for you. We want to remind you, best content here does show up over there at usdailyreview.com, and this is The Price of Business.